Male gaze. The essay was submitted as part of a professional writing course with a focus on non-fictional narratives, which means I bury students in reading while shouting things like, "What you notice is important," and "Capitalism is the devil." The whole class, at least those who are still attending, knows I'm writing this essay, or rather that my pitch has been accepted. It's my 8th year teaching college, and the first semester I've felt old instead of worried that my students will realize the difference between us is only a few years of bad decisions. I'm not sure what has tipped me over this precipice. The class has a shared Spotify playlist that I let loose when we were doing writing assignments, and when we were first compiling it, I learned that a student had just started listening to Nirvana. I applauded as if he cared about my opinion. Later, he added "Wish You Were Here" to the list, and when we were back in class, I tried to explain the dark side of the rainbow to their impassive faces, saying the thing where, you put on the dark side of the moon, the Wizard of Oz. What I wanted to say was, have you done this? Is this still a thing that people do? But even though weed is decriminalized where we're theoretically attending class, I can't bring myself to ask the question I'm asking. When I was 15, I downloaded at least a third of Pink Floyd's discography off LimeWire because I'd pretended to understand a joke. The actually funny part about the situation is that my soon-to-be boyfriend had wrongly described a sound as bells ringing, which meant I began my search with the division bell and alternately Googled and listened to so many hours of music before uneasily deciding that Time on the Dark Side of the Moon must have been what he was talking about. The track actually opens with the sound of chiming clocks. It was very important to me that I was not like the other girls. I cultivated a personality that was both intense and aloof, not sweet, but still highly attuned to the slightest shifts in a boy's mood. John's family was complicated, and its complications afforded us space to be reckless. We smoked cigarettes in the 2-bedroom apartment he shared with his parents with the window shut, ate ice cream in the bathtub and mushrooms at the small public playground, watched The Wizard of Oz with the volume turned down and Pink Floyd as loud as it'd go on the record player. I understood that those same complications meant that John would sometimes be sad or angry, and that during those times his feelings were to take precedence over everything else. Our class meets at 8 in the morning, and most students trickle in at the last possible moment, verging on late, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes after the hour. I feel like Michael J. Frog in that yawning stretch of time. In a Zoom room of eventually 20 faces, real casual conversation is impossible. Instead, I ad-lib tired, I ad-lib an obsession with my cat, I ad-lib conspicuously old person attempts to engage with popular culture. I feel obliged to offer up something of myself, even if only a performance, in exchange for the stories they'll tell about their lives. I am struck by the high proportion of students who are women, who are of Asian ethnicity, who are openly queer. Early on in the semester, I offer, it's clear I went through a long phase of dating thin white men who thought they had great taste in music. Caitlyn can vouch for this, by the way. It's one of my many joke, not jokes, and one of these women who might look like me replies without any sarcasm or malice, it's good to know that is an intergenerational experience. The following week, I suggest starting the collaborative playlist. The Dark Side of the Moon was only the first in a long line of albums I'd learned by heart because I had faith in transitive properties and wanted one man or another to find me interesting. That's also the word I would use to describe that album, interesting. The first track functions as an overture, the remaining 45-ish minutes, each sound effects repetition pushes on that reward cluster of neurons. But that's not the type of thing I'd say. The Dark Side of the Moon is both critically acclaimed and popular, and if I could pick one album to broadly appeal to the type of man I found attractive when I was younger, this would be it. That was a whole 30 years after its release, and it has become no less popular in the passing decade, though it's likely those unfortunate men have just grown up alongside me. It punted Pink Floyd onto the billboards, has sold more than 45 million copies. A 2018 Rolling Stone article begins with the sentence, "There are hit albums, and then there's Dark Side of the Moon." I used to feel best about work when I convinced students to become excited by exposition, but my favorite moments in class are now when the students are interacting with one another of their own volition. Two women spam each other with texts whenever one is unmuted. Each of their ping responses ping and ping questions ping are ping punctuated with sound. Another woman mentions that she has knitted a Harry Styles sweater, and tiny chorus of screams appear in the public chat box. Because it is 8 in the morning and we are more than a year into the pandemic, the joke not jokes are bleak. I've been awake since 10 a.m. yesterday and I'm only alive because of Bang. They also type things like Moana is a real banger and TBH, that was cringe, when I try to ask a question in workshop about how many people are familiar with the plot of said banger. I want to invite all of them to my house and make them coffee and feed them citrus fruits and breakfast pastries. The Dark Side of the Moon is an album I'd put on repeat if I wanted to get stoned and lie on the floor and have an intellectual experience of intense listening. Otherwise, it's ambient noise. As I've gotten older and stopped pretending as much, I've learned I like music that makes me feel things, that bypasses my intellectual circuitry and goes right for the jugular. Sometimes my jugular warrants Taylor Swift. While I'd love to laud myself as having done lots of hard emotional work to overcome how I'd bent to become more appealing, and that I've learned lessons about sincerity, the truth is mostly that I am tired. Every morning, I ask my students a question about their lives. What's a place you've always wanted to visit? A good movie you've seen recently? Your essay 2 topic? I sometimes prod for details and they groan in response. The most recent one was vicious. What would you contribute to the Museum of Broken Relationships? After everyone answered, right as I was about to launch into my routine, a woman said, what would you contribute? And I was so surprised that she'd asked the question so directly after months of nothing that I said, I'd have a whole wing. And I laughed like it was one of the many joke not jokes, but I accidentally told them the truth, and I think they all knew. And that is my essay. And the kicker, I think, on it is I was talking earlier with Becky and Caitlyn about how I'm on the academic job market, and you have to talk to deans, and deans are generally older white men, and they all see like Pink Floyd on the CV, and they don't really have time to like read all your application materials. So they just see Pink Floyd, and they all want to talk about Pink Floyd, which is pretty funny given the context of the essay. So yeah, that's my piece. And next up we have Becky, and I am so excited to hear her read.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Before I do anything, I just want to plug Caitlyn's book because that's why we're here. And it's really brilliant. And I feel like it's the kind of book you can just like keep in your purse and read after you've had a beer, or you're just lonely in the morning and need some poetry. It's my birthday today also. So thank you for being here on my birthday. If y'all want to like Venmo me $20, feel free. Shout out to my roommates who are downstairs listening. Hello, roommates. They cheered. So I'm going to read my book that you should buy from Village Books, because Village Books is an incredible bookstore. And when you buy books from them, it helps them do stuff like this. But I'm reading from a book that I've been working on for the last few years that I'm excited to share. And I've never read any of it out loud except one time at an open mic at the Conway pub way back when, or the Muse, something like that. So yeah, this is sort of a new thing and I hope you like it. All you need to know is that it's about two young friends named Lainey and Rue. And this is sort of early into their friendship, and Lainey has fallen pretty hard for Rue, who we're starting to see is maybe a little bit dangerous for her. So this chapter is called Sump Pump. On really hot days, Rue and I would descend into her basement, a magnificent expanse of bare cement unimpeded by furniture. Her brother's old rollerblades and skateboard were down there, so we would cruise around in circles, playing a game we called Roller Sluts USA. In the game, Rue and I traveled the world performing competitive skate tricks and seducing our fans. We'd blast off from one side of the basement, pressing our boobs together to create cleavage, and then strike sultry glamour poses until we wiped out or reached the other wall. Our panel of judges consisted of life-size cardboard movie cutouts that Rue and her mom, Judy, had acquired from Blockbusters over the years. All you have to do is ask the manager and they'll give you whatever they're about to throw away, Rue explained, as if this was the most ordinary thing in the world. Anyone who saw or heard us might have thought we were disturbed. Rue would say crazy things like, I could have totally landed that 360, but the judge's boner was so distracting. Or, I don't have enough power for an ollie. I'm exhausted from a long night of major fellatio. More often than not, I had no idea what she was talking about, so I would just laugh along or repeat our new favorite word, tubular, and keep pushing myself around, belly to board, my hands paddling at the ground as Glenn Close from 101 Dalmatians watched on. One afternoon, we were fooling around in the basement when I was struck by the urge to go number 2. Close your ears if you're squeamish about poop stories. It was storming outside and a gaggle of ladies were in the kitchen playing mahjong with Judy. Every now and then, Rue and I would hear them laugh upstairs, a pack of hyenas preparing for a kill. Is there a bathroom down here? I asked Rue, who was strapping on elbow pads so she could hurl herself into a pile of old couch cushions we called Mosh Pit City. There's like 10 upstairs, she said. I don't want to go upstairs, I said. Those ladies are going to try to talk to me. She considered this for a second. Well, there's not a bathroom down here exactly, but there is a place for you to go. I followed her down a hallway and into a storage room. In the corner was a bucket-sized hole in the ground filled with murky brown water. A white pipe ran up from the center of the hole and into a wall. It's not a toilet yet, Rue explained. There's all the stuff where a toilet should go, like the plumbing and pipes and all that, but the basement is unfinished, so none of the actual bathroom stuff is here yet. I made a sound, like this was all very interesting and I would take it into account when designing my future home. So I just go in the hole, I asked. Rue nodded. You just go in the hole. For a moment, we stared at one another. She looked a little crazed. Her forehead was sweaty, her hair pasted to the side of her face. She was still wearing her rollerblades and she towered over me. Can you go somewhere else for a second? I asked. Duh, she said. I'll be right over here. She skated to the end of the hallway. As soon as she was out of sight, I dropped my shorts and squatted over the hole. Everything released. It was messy business, but I was relieved not to have to deal with the women upstairs. Knowing there was a bathroom down here changed everything. Rue and I could hang out for hours and never have to resurface. When I was done, I looked around. No toilet paper. Rue, I asked, still squatting. The air beneath me was suddenly cold. She peeked her head down the hallway. Yeah? Toilet paper, I said. Shoot, she said. Give me a sec. I heard her skating around. My legs were quivering. I wanted to stand up, but I was worried I'd make an even bigger mess if I did. Finally, Rue appeared with a book in her hand. What is that? I asked. Some dumb old novel, she said. You can use it to wipe. I looked at the cover. It was Anne of Green Gables. I loved Anne of Green Gables. I don't want to, I said. Well, there's no teepee down here, she said. Can't you go get some upstairs? I don't want to talk to those old hags either, she said. That's the whole reason we're doing this, remember? Her face was so serious, so matter-of-fact, that I had no choice but to take the novel. Luckily, there were 2 blank pages at the front, so I removed those first. I tried to wipe gently, but the paper hurt. I was still wiping when I heard a sound. Shit, Rue said. Shit what? I asked. Someone's coming, she said. Tears welled in my eyes. Why was I so upset? This was a toilet and I was doing toilet business. Who is it? I asked. I don't know, she said, but can you hurry and finish? This paper isn't doing anything, I said. I need real toilet paper. There's nothing else, Lainey, she said. You need to finish now. But before either of us could do anything, there was her mom, Judy, casually walking down the hallway. Unsure what else to do, I duck walked behind some shelves, my shorts at my ankles. What are you two doing back there? I heard Judy ask. Mom, we're telling secrets about boys, Rue said. Go away. There was silence, and I imagined Judy looking around, sniffing the air. The smell. Of course, there was the smell. It was everywhere. It was all over me. It was in the ground, in the not yet toilet. How did one flush a toilet that was not yet a toilet? Rue eventually convinced Judy to go back upstairs, and we snuck out a storm window so I could rinse myself in the yard with a hose, the air thick and soupy from the storm. The next day, I was in the car with Mom when she turned the radio down. Can I ask you a question? She said. That was a question, I said. She sighed. Can I ask you multiple questions? Are you not already? I said. Do you know what a sump pump is? She asked. We were driving home from a dentist appointment and my mouth hurt. The taste of metal and blood on my tongue. A what? I asked. A sump pump, she said. Do you know what it is? Why are you asking me this? I said. Judy called me this morning, she said. I froze. She said she found poop in her sump pump. She had to fish it out with a clothes hanger. Rue said it was yours. She told me it was a toilet, I cried. And you believed her? Mom asked. For a moment, I couldn't tell if I was in trouble, but then Mom started laughing. You need to learn to think for yourself, she said. I always think for myself. I crossed my arms and stared hard out the window. My teeth ached. I felt the dentist had treated me unfairly, that he had been rough because I didn't complain. I wondered what Rue did at the dentist, if she moaned and whined until the dentist gave her laughing gas or told her she could just leave, that he couldn't stand to hurt someone as pretty as her, and that her teeth were perfect anyways. Thank you. Sorry to disturb any pre-dinner plans. So up next, we have the lady of the hour, Caitlyn. Sorry, I realize this cover probably looks backwards to everybody. But yeah, here is Caitlyn Scarano.
Thanks, Becky. True story, everyone. Becky recently loaned me a copy of Anne of Green Gables, so she is a real fan. Thank you all for being here tonight. This is the first official event of my the launch of my second full-length collection. It's called The Necessity of Wildfire, and you can pick it up at Village Books or online at places where books are sold. I'm just going to read a few poems tonight, and then Becky and Alysia and I will chat a bit, and we're happy to take your questions. If you have any questions, feel free to put those into the chat. Okay, thanks. This first poem is called The Houses Where They Eat the Lambs. Wishbone, forked bone, between the neck and breast of a bird, but we are not the bird, nor the feather, nor the stone that brought her warm body down. I am the weak point, a snap, folkular crack. You are the wish mouthed against a wall of air, worm between the ribs, smeared blood above a door. Dedication takes many forms. We stand by these bleached altars, gather veins like soft blue thread in a basket of skin. To not harm each other is not enough. I want to love you so much that you have no before, no mother, no bower, no history of burning doors. The sea with her rising wet ash, to be marrow intimate, a crime committed squatting among the reeds. Add grit to the skin for texture, crouch like a toad beneath the bowl of your skull, and turn the skeleton key in your eye. Lover, we will know no neighbors, no light beyond the teeth of a laughing loon. This next poem is one of the older ones in the collection. It's to my sisters, for my sisters. I have two sisters, an older and younger. The poem is called Nights Like These, I Think of My Sisters. Girls who live like flashes in me, crimson, rage, and eye teeth. metal coils ready to spring. Photographic flash of the snapshots my father took of us on the first day of school before his leaving, dazed by the light in his wake. Girl, be the flame who leaps the highest, the one who catches the heavy velvet curtains on fire and brings down the house. Never know a mild winter. Never be bell jar bent. Don't be the rosewood they take for carving. Don't swoon, don't apologize, don't polish. We are the animals between us, not the men, not the little deaths. Don't be the silence in the cellar, the secret buried behind the white barn. All those years you spent in the forest, all those latchkey days, don't let that pinprick hole in your chest grow to swallow you. Don't be the horse licking sugar from anyone's hand. Be the mare that bolts. No, be the land beyond the gate that compels her. This next poem is called Partition, and it's based on an actual event where I was walking one day near this apartment where I used to live in Anacortes, Washington, and I saw this dead rabbit that was like, literally was like severed, like the head was just a few inches from the body. And it just like stayed with me when I was writing later that day. Partition. On my walk this morning, I find a rabbit in two pieces. First, the loose body, devoid of spine and legs, and then the head, perfectly intact, resting 2 inches away from the torso. Blood bright, darling, what do you see? The space between what happened and what is we imagine. In a dream, you and I are driving a dirt road through a wildfire. We are trying to survive each other. We're trying to get home. When was the last time you spoke my name? Was it into a cavern so the echoes rebounded, greater than the sum of its parts? Or did you whisper into a baby shoe and toss it into the river? Uproot the memory of my tongue against your tongue, at war with wanting to be spoken for. The rabbit's eyes are open, the killer doesn't matter. Grief, blood bright, unspoiling, greater than the sum of its parts. I dreamt the fire because it was true. Last night, I almost called you, but we're both tired as love as partition, and I cannot make sense of the body before me, how it was moving one moment, wretched and inert the next, how you were here for 1,065 nights, and now my hands are empty, the rabbit is dead. In the dream, the fire surrounds us, but you are laughing, certain the rain is just about to fall. My first collection is called Do Not Bring Him Water. And that collection, among other things, dealt with the death of my father and sort of how I pieced together what I knew about his life, what I knew about his life before he passed, and what I learned about his life after he passed, and was about addiction, thinking about his alcoholism and my own. I got sober in September 2016. And so I think in the second collection there, it's definitely building off of the first, and there's still like some threads, some ways in which I'm engaging with the content from the first collection. This poem is called On His Deathbed. My father, who I haven't seen in 10 years, offers me homemade moonshine. Did you think it would come to this, that you'd be begging the mirror you stuck your fist through to put itself back together? You can't stitch glass. You can't call home. You can't love just one part of a person. After this, I'll know how things leak, that death begins in slow drips. Your body will go down a shower drain, one canary yellow drop at a time. To make moonshine, 5 gallons of water, 8.5 pounds of cracked corn, 1.5 pounds of crushed malted barley, and a pinch of yeast. 4 shots and heads. Pray that you distill past the threat of blindness. Hearts, ripe as years, bloody and beating on the branches of an apple tree. Take more than you can consume and the whole bushel rots. Tails, you'll know when the sweetness runs thin, slick to the touch, faints and cuts. Set these jars aside for an uncertain future. After this, I'll love and leave 5 men in 2 years. After this, I'll check the underside of my mattress for mold from the sweat of all their bodies. I'll count the rocks on the bottom of a dive bar's bathroom floor. After this, I won't be mad. I'll learn to save my anger for those willing to fight back. So the next poem I'm going to read is called They Named You Patriarch. And some of you may know this or may not know this. I'm on the Wolf Advisory Group for the state of Washington, and I am very interested in wildlife and human-wildlife interactions and policy. And so there are some aspects of that and my interest in ecology in the Necessity of Wildfire. So They Named You Patriarch. In July 2020, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife reported the natural death of wolf 32M, the first wolf to establish a pack in the Central Cascades in 100 years, and the former breeding male of the Tenaway pack. The hillsides were on fire that year you came down, timid with an unassuming face. It is late August. The night delivers mountains to my lonely doorstep, murmurs of winter. Each season disappears like a snake swallowing its tail. All I can think about is how few summers we each get. The air was soft with years. You had 12, long for a wolf. In the video of researchers collaring you, I study the pads of your feet, massive and made to be worn down. I read about the progeny you sired, wolves that dispersed across the state, some all the way back to British Columbia, where you came from. Or the son who left Tenaway with you and later joined the Nananum pack, how you set off on your own then, almost as if you just had to see him off first. How stillness finally finds us. The air was soft, your radio collar emitting a mortality signal from the creek bed where you lay down. I was fortunate enough to go to Oregon on a trip last summer and walked along the Metolius River and to the headwaters where the spring where the Metolius comes from. And I was sort of struck by how unassuming it looked, just sort of like a sliver in the side of a bank, but how much flows from it. And that metaphor caused me to think about the relationship that I was in at the time. This poem is called Wellspring. My fingers in your mouth, I find a soft history of caverns, echoes of the last two women who loved you, your wife and the one after. How much flows underground without us knowing? When we were in Oregon, we hiked to the headwaters of the Metolius. It didn't look like much, water bubbling from a slit in the embankment. What we see is deceptive, a slow trickle, 50,000 gallons per minute, kokanee salmon, rainbow trout, bull trout, and mountain whitefish. All those years I spent toiling upstream, Wellspring, my God, how I hunted you, followed the tracks of a snowshoe hare through a decade of drifts, hindfoot and forefoot, followed small drops of blood from my bedroom to yours, like Gretel and her little stones. At the headwaters that day, you took a picture of us, our backs to the mountain. I kept my eyes open despite the unrelenting light. To think you were a stranger not so long ago, and now I am inside of you, cold, clear, constant. Tributaries gather. The fen fills with wild flowers, aster, pearly everlasting, blazing star. Fish spawn and rot, ribbon grass takes over. You will suffer. I will suffer. This poem is in response to a man who told me that I expected too much. Some thoughts on the one who said I expected too much. My mistake to try to architecture astonishment from everything, even the snakeskin we found in the attic the day of your cousin's wedding. She was ankle length and sternum bones. I could count them. We only danced to one song. You were wrong about Virginia, wrong about the color of my eyes, wrong to judge me ungentle. Must have been all that static snow in your ears or the fear you wrought into a father's hatchet. I was the line finally gone taut, winter of want, the pike sucked from the water, beating my spine against the ice. 4 years you accused me of a barking dog. 4 years I dreamt a flock of floating baby shoes. I laughed at a crown of firethorn and poison ivy, laughed when my forehead bled, laughed like this was what we wanted. I lied to you about so much, but the mercy I mouthed for was true. Now a lover asks me what I want, to have my hair pulled, to rain, to be blue smoke, all of it, all of it. He plants nut trees, talks in terms of palimpsest instead of damage, saw a cedar shake house by a green river and built it. Can you imagine? You could barely get out of the truck to help me. You could barely hold my voice in cupped hands. Couldn't believe I kicked in a door when a door needed to be kicked in. A body can be made brave, husk back bracts to the meat, to this throat red ruby, to the clearest voice in me, both childless and unchildlike. I forgive myself my hunger because it propelled me to cross that lithium-streaked lake between us. As long as it doesn't bite or linger, your ghost may pass through here. You may even eat of my table. I am that steel toad now, flexible of bone, christened of dog tooth. I'm just gonna read one more, and I haven't decided which one that is. Okay, this is actually one of my favorite poems in the collection. It's called After the Horses Are Gone. Your face is more masked than dreamer. There is no girl to feel inside your mouth, count your teeth. You sleep heavy and thoughtless as the stones you gave me when you wanted to know the earth's substance and structure. After the horses are gone, your mother calls, but you don't answer. You call your father, but he doesn't answer. You shiver like a warbler caught in the rafters of an abandoned copper mine during a storm. Wolves still ask for each other, but we do not stand between their voices. Everything we individually witness has no witness. After the horses are gone, there's no one to blame. I stuff my mouth with glass, use it to kiss anyone who will have me. They twitch and talk in their sleep. I save all of it in my mother's jars. After the horses are gone, you write out isolation in loopy cursive like a lover's name. I lift my talking head from my neck, wedge it between branches. Juncos move like mice in the end of season snow. Thank you. Okay, so now I think Becky, Alysia, and I will have a little conversation, maybe ask each other some questions. And we can take any questions from the audience. If you all have them, please put them into the chat now. And again, I want to thank you all for listening and joining us tonight. I know we're all pretty Zoom exhausted. So I'm going to start with a question for Becky. Can you tell us the origins of your latest project or book?
Sure, Caitlin. That was really lovely reading, by the way. This book started in 2018, I think. And I had always wanted to write about a really intense friendship I had when I was younger. And I'm fascinated by female friendships, and they're some of the strongest friendships or strongest relationships in my life. And so I like thinking about them and writing about them. And this friend I had when I was growing up was like very unique, and she's sort of like stranger than fiction in a lot of ways. For anyone who meets her, they would probably agree with that. She's very unusual, and so the character in my book is sort of based on her. And I think maybe I even knew when we were friends back in like elementary school time that I would like one day harvest some of the things that we did and use them for something, because like those memories stand out in pretty bold colors. So yeah, I can't remember why I started writing it, other than those memories were really accessible, and it's been a really fun book to write, unlike other things I've written in the past. It's just a lot of like very natural storytelling in it, because most of it is based on like half truths. So yeah. Can I flip the question around to you, Caitlyn, and ask about the origins of this book? And specifically, I'm curious about the, like a lot of them are related to place, and the title of the book is, you know, related to wildfires, which have been really prevalent the past couple of years, especially out here. So yeah, if you can just talk a little bit about how this collection started and how place fed into the work.
Yeah. So if anyone's familiar with my work, they probably know that I draw a lot on my personal experience, on the experiences of my family, especially the women in my family. I take as one of my main themes in my work is tackling multi-generational trauma, especially domestic trauma, and what women have experienced. And I've tried to break silence around some of the things that have happened to the women in my family. And I like to think multi-generationally, like think about my mother's mother, think about my mother, think about my sisters, my niece, myself. So there's sort of like, as I'm writing and thinking about it, I'm thinking about like a lineage behind me, like what and who is behind me, and what and who is before me, or who is to come. And I also think about how those issues, like there may be women who I never meet, or women identified people who I never meet, but maybe these poems, they will relate to these poems, or maybe it will help them think about what they've been through and how to, I don't know, break the cycle of silence that's often around these things. So yeah, those have been, those personal topics have traditionally been the major themes of my work. But I would say in the past 4 or 5 years, especially since moving to Washington, my work has taken more of an ecological turn. So I'm writing these personal poems, and then I'm also working on these projects that are more about ecological issues, especially like nature and wildlife. And so one of the things that I see happening in this collection is where there's some intersection of those two things, like the more ecological nature-based writing in projects and the more personal family-based writing in projects. I thought of the title when I moved to Washington in the summer of 2017. I was living up near the North Cascades, and there were a lot of wildfires, and I'd experienced wildfires when I lived in Alaska, but never to the extent as I had experienced them here. So it was just sort of like wildfire smoke, like sort of hanging over us a big part of that summer. And so I learned more about wildfire and the ecological benefits of wildfire, the sort of important and regenerative role that it plays in an ecosystem, but how often because of like human activity, wildfires are not, they're like being more out of control in these days, related to climate change and deforestation, things like that. So it's an interesting metaphor, right? Like what seems destructive can actually be create space for something new, like renewal. So that's the idea that I'm trying to play with in the whole collection. A lot of these poems are from my PhD dissertation also, and I wrote them roughly between 2017 and 2020. Alysia, would you answer the question?
I mean, I don't have like the, I guess working in nonfiction, it's like, well, uh, there is no veil. No, my project actually started as a joke in grad school, which was the joke was basically that I had like, 24 hours to do an assignment. And I was dating a thin white man who thought he had really great taste in music. And his mom really liked to tell me about her Asian friend all the time. And I would always like, one day in a rage, I was like, I'm gonna write a series of micros called I Know All About Your Asian Friend, Nancy. And I had, like I said, not a lot of time to write an assignment, and I wrote it out and turned it in, and my teacher was like, this is amazing. I was like, really? And I'm just like a sucker for approval. And so, 5 years later, that's still the project I'm working on. It is no longer called that, and I don't think it would be recognizable as that. But like that is really the seeds of that project. It's a research collection. Well, I mean, it's about me, but I'm doing a lot of research for it, and flowers are sort of like the organizing principle. So it's like a herbarium basically, which is like a bestiary for plants. Yeah, it started as like a bad joke essentially. So, yeah, I feel like anonymous attendee has asked how we all manage writing material that includes people in real life who will read your work and see themselves. And I feel like we can all answer that in pretty interesting ways. I've had a real range of responses, but again, like I'm definitely like writing nonfiction, right? Like I can't be like, oh, that's just like you're imagining that, man. But I did actually, I have a composite character in my book, but it's like he is written as a composite character, and I did have that experience actually with one of those people, and that I was like, this is a composite character. You're like absolutely projecting yourself into like the entirety of this. But yes, and there was another character who I actively worked to like just take out identifying information about them because they don't look great for some of the things that they do, and it was just one of those things where like I didn't really want to put them on blast for stuff, and so I did work to take out some identifying stuff. But yeah, I think for me it's just one of the hazards of like being a person around me, so it's unfortunate. But yeah, I would love to hear more about like Caitlyn and Becky, how you do that, because I feel like yours will be way more interesting in terms of like people reading your work and seeing themselves in it or imagining themselves in it, as the case may be.
Caitlyn.
I get this question a lot, often from men, actually. Like how do I draw my personal life, or how do I justify writing about those in my life? And I think part of what you're saying, Alysia, is it's like, this is my craft, this is what I do. And if I'm drawing from my own experience like that, it's possible that those that I love or interact with may appear in my work, literally or figuratively, right? I do try to approach, like, since I do write so much from my own experience, I do try to approach this with care. And it's always contextual, right? Like, what am I writing and who am I writing about and why? And I think if I'm writing about actual people, especially those that I care about, those that are close to my life, I really try to think about what am I sharing? What is the purpose with which I'm sharing? And what do I owe that person? Also trying to think about like, what sort of honesty do I owe the reader, whoever the reader may be? I think Vivian Gornick has a book, The Situation and the Story. And there's this question that I always think of, which I think I've like reworded. It may not even be the original question she had in the book, but she talks about how when you're writing from your own life, to think about or try to address in the writing the question, what part did I play in this? So if I'm taking a critical lens, and by critical, I just mean like an analytical lens on those around me, I also think that I should be turning that lens on myself. Like, what role did I play in a situation? What was my part? What was my intention? And I think one of the things that I've tried to embrace in my work is moral ambiguity. Like the older I get, the less I think about people in terms of good and evil or good and bad. And like, I'm interested in the ways in which we can do things that are harmful and do things that are rooted in care. And I'm interested in looking at a network of circumstances that may cause someone to act in a harmful way or a more caring way, to get at a more complex understanding of people and human nature and relationships. I'm very fascinated by human relationships. But in thinking about people I actually know who are actually reading my work, I think often of my mother. I know this is hard for her. Like, I know that my work has to be challenging for her because it's like sharing a lot of things that happened in our family that maybe she struggles with still. But I also like try to keep that the conversation open, like tell her like, this is what I'm working on, share with her when work is coming out. And she's also like my biggest fan. So even if it's challenging for her, she still understands like my intentions and encourages me to do what's right for myself and my writing. Becky, I'd be interested to hear your answer to that, because you're a fiction writer, but you're drawing on your own experience.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about your mom, Caitlyn, because I definitely write a lot of mom characters, and I feel like many of them are not like at all related to my real mom. In fact, they're like in Brightside, there's a really complicated mom who makes, I think, a lot of mistakes in her relationship with her daughter. And I think it's often readers' impulse to be like, oh, that's her mother or something. And like those who know my mom know that it's like completely the opposite. And so that's awkward for me because I'm like, oh no, I don't want anyone thinking anything bad about my mom. But it's just sort of like a hazard of the occupation, I guess. But at least in fiction, you can hide behind that fiction wall, which weirdly, the book I'm working on right now is about that. It's about the friend Lainey, the main friend, ends up writing a book about her friend Rue that sort of like outs one of the big secrets of their childhood. And so the book kind of explores that, which clearly it's something I subconsciously think about. And in the book, I'm writing about a childhood friend. So yeah, it's kind of, I think it's way easier in fiction because a lot of times my characters are based loosely on people I know. Like even my childhood friend who was sort of like the seed that started this book, she's so different than the character I ultimately wrote. So like if she read the book, or if anyone who knows her read the book, they'd be like, oh, this is like based on Becky and our friend's shenanigans. Like I know who this is about. But if they, that would be incorrect taken across the whole book because there's so much that I just invented. So I think it's dangerous in fiction because people do make their own assumptions of like, oh, this character has the same name or occupation as this person, so it must be them. And then, but most of the time it's like I steal things from my friends, like I'm familiar with what they do for their job, so I'll like apply that onto a character, but then their personality is totally different, or they do heinous things that the real person would never do. So it like one time I named a character after one of my aunts, and then my other aunt read the story and got like really upset about it and called my mom and was like, why does Becky want like this family member to die? Like she dies in the story. And I like, it just like did not even cross my mind that anyone would think that. So that's definitely something to think about, but that's why I have written essays about my family that like I've shared with my mom, and she said like, I don't want you to publish that. And so I haven't sent those out. And I think that like, I think it's just a matter of what how hurtful something is or how private something is. And sometimes you just write things for yourself and they stay with yourself. Or you say it's fiction and people never have to know. So it was a really long, rambling answer to that.
No, it's a complicated question, and one that I think we all have to grapple with all the time. And there's no one answer and there's no right answer. It's just, I think giving attention to that question is the first step.
Yeah.
Maggie has asked the question, and I think this could be our last question since we're almost at 7 o'clock. What books have been getting you through the pandemic? And I read Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents during the pandemic. And that was a very powerful experience. And Adrienne Marie Brown and Toshi Regan have a podcast series where they do an episode for every chapter in both of those books, which I highly recommend. I think it's called Octavia's Parables.
Maggie is a friend of mine in my writing group. And so I'm going to say Maggie's amazing, beautiful memoir that I read in the pandemic for the second time, I think. That was definitely an important book for me during the pandemic. And similarly, I think reading the work of my friends, like reading your book, Caitlyn, and reading like works in progress by people in my writing group, the classes I've taught, reading that work, like I think that has more than any of the books, even that I've really loved over the past couple of years, like seeing new stuff happening in the world is really inspiring and hopeful.
I've been reading a lot of like fairy tales or new fairy tales. I taught a class last semester on like magic and myth in contemporary literature, and so I basically just picked books that I loved and fit the topic and wanted to reread and make people talk to me about. So like Anne Carson and Helen Oyeyemi and Carmen Maria Machado, and just like real sort of like, you know, fabulous sort of fantastical, I don't want to be here type of pieces. So yeah, I'm going to the full flight for mine.
Yeah, I can kind of relate to that. I've never read science fiction until during the pandemic. And it's like, I'm sure there's something there about imagining alternative realities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I think we're done with the Q&A. Thank you both for reading with me at this event. And thank you, Village Books, for hosting us.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have all of you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you to our audience, everyone, for joining us. I'm sending a link in the chat. It's the link to the event page where you can find all 3 of our authors' books. And I also sent the link to the YouTube channel if you want to rewatch this event or check out other events or future events. Once again, thank you so much, Alysia, Becky, and Caitlyn, and congratulations. This was a wonderful event, and thank you for joining us. Any last words from any of you at all?
Happy birthday, Becky.
Happy birthday, Becky.
Caitlyn.
Thank
You
you.
both are wonderful.
Baby book day, Caitlyn.
Thanks.
Thank you all once again, and have a great rest of your evening.